Hi everyone, welcome to my talk on A Leader's Guide to a Quality Culture. Today I'm going to talk about some ideas I have on how we can influence or change the culture of our teams to embrace quality more, not just testing, but quality all up. And I'll share some guidelines and models I've used to help improve quality culture on teams over the last few years. I'm Alan Page, and let's go ahead and get started. The first thing to figure out here is what exactly is a culture of quality? If I were to ask 10 of you, I'd probably get at least 11 different answers. So today we'll dwell a little bit on what exactly a culture of quality is. Then I'll talk a little bit about how you can drive or lead your teams to change their culture, which is a hard kind of change. And then I'll talk about some practical examples and a model I've used to help improve the quality culture of an organization. Of course, quality is much more than testing, and something I care deeply about. In fact, I care about quality much more than I do about testing. But let's get back to that original question. What is a culture of quality? And I find this quote from Justice Potter Stewart. It's pretty famous. It's often paraphrased. I don't know what it looks like, but I'll tell you when I see it. And in this case, he's talking about pornography, but in the case of a quality culture, it can be the same thing. So the question remains, what is a culture of quality and what does that look like? I'm inspired by one of my favorite books here, a treatise on the culture of quality, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, where Robert Pirsig basically says, again paraphrase, that quality and care are two sides to the same coin. So, which is great, and if you think about it, it makes sense. If you think about products that are well built, whether they're software or hardware or electronics or anything, care does have a correlation with quality. Measuring care is fairly difficult. So, but there's something there. So I like to think about this quote when I think about what a quality culture is, but it's not the whole answer. So I'll get into a little bit of how I defined it in a minute, but let's talk about the real hard part of this first for just a few minutes. And that is, how do you take a team, an organization, a company, from a place where you are now, wherever that is, whatever your level of quality, whether it's what you think is a very high level and you want to make it better, or a very low level of culture of quality and you want to improve it. How do you go from where you are now up to a level of a quality culture that you see as your ultimate goal? The first thing between those two things is to define the current state and the desired state. The current state should be pretty easy if you're paying attention to your organization. The desired state is where you want to be at some point down the road. It can be 6 months, a year, no time frame involved at all. What you want to do is define current state, desired state, and then just the next steps. The only thing you can control now are the next steps. What you'll find when you work in a model like this, and it's probably a lot of head nods on this one if I could see you, pretty much common sense. We can only do now what we can do now. So, but if you define the desired state, and the desired state could be something way out there, like I'm not even going to try and fathom a unrealistically high culture of quality, but define where you want to go. What do you want to be known as? What do you want to do? And then figure out the next steps you can take. And then after the next steps, reevaluate. What I found in using a model like this is that the desired state changes, and that's fine. But those next steps always help you move forward. This concept of desired state and current state comes from a book called Leadership on the Line by Ronald Heffitz, which is one of my favorites, which has one of my most quoted quotes, my most repeated quotes on leadership, which is that leadership is disappointing people at a level they can absorb. Which, if you think about it, makes a lot of sense. Leadership is a lot about making decisions. Leadership is a lot about sometimes making decisions that aren't popular with everyone, and that's fine. It's part of what we do. A line I just used today a couple times in a meeting is that alignment is not consensus. Sometimes consensus is the right thing to do. Often it's a slower thing to do. Of course, you don't want to make a lot of enemies and leave bodies in your wake, but Sometimes, as a leader, you will make unpopular choices as you move people forward, as long as they can see the value in what you're doing in progress. It's at a level they can absorb. Another thing this book talks about a lot, in fact, the entire book is about this differentiation between technical challenges and adaptive challenges. And technical challenges are the things a lot of us face every day. They're relatively easy. They could be a hard implementation problem in software. It could be developing an entire feature or a feature set, but it just requires work. The challenge is fairly easy to identify and scope. The solution is clear. Of course, it may involve weeks and weeks or months of work, but the solution is clear. And a relatively small number of changes and can be completed relatively quickly. Implementing a new debugging system, adding a new window system, technical challenges. But Heffitz differentiates those with adaptive challenges, which fall very much into the realm of changing a quality culture. And in an adaptive challenge, it's difficult to identify. Solution's unclear. It requires system thinking because the changes you need to make may be required in multiple places. They may be process changes or technical changes or people changes. And it requires a lot of experimentations and discovery. It's kind of like building the plane while you're flying a little bit. Need to look at that desired state and move forward and adapt, paying attention to what's happening with the system, paying attention to what's happening with the people involved, and making sure things are moving forward. These are by far adaptive challenges and much more difficult, but it's a kind of challenge that as you grow in leadership, I think you take on more and more and more. Moving from a leadership position where you are leading the work a team is doing towards leading the team towards a vision which requires more than just technical work to accomplish. This sort of mindset, and if you're interested in changing the culture of a team or moving a team who may be set in their ways in any ways where they may not agree with your decisions, I highly recommend this book. It's not a blueprint, but it'll give you some ideas on how to take on some of the challenges you'll run into. So book blurb over. It wouldn't be a presentation by me if I didn't include at least one book reference. But for the remainder of this talk, that's kind of the setup on how you can go about doing this. But rather than be all hand-wavy and theoretical, I want to talk about the practical ways I've been able to get teams to improve their quality culture. And that's my dog is here to help. She's here to help make it practical. Let me start with how this practical guide came into being. Of course, many years ago, I read Continuous Delivery when it came out, and it had, I'll show you on a screenshot on the next screen, a maturity model on DevOps. But when Accelerate came out, and this book's been very popular the last few years, I'm sure a lot of you have read it, a lot of great information from this book, but also Accelerate had a section talking about maturity models and how they didn't like them, which resonated well with me. So I had been reading, Accelerate had just come out, and I had read it for the first time. And I was in a meeting where my manager asked me about a quality culture. And because I love to take on things I don't know how to do, I said, you know what? I think I can define what a quality culture is. So I had Accelerate in my head, and that made me go back to Continuous Delivery book. And then I saw this Forest Colorized chart from Continuous Delivery. It's a maturity model. The idea is you move from not being so good at something to being very good at something with some intermediate steps in between. And then there's a little bit of a model here from Accelerate. Again, it's not a maturity model here because Nicole Forsgren, the author of that book, and I are highly agreed on the pros and cons of maturity models, and mostly cons. But these things ruminated in my head, and I thought, I was going back and thinking about all the times I had worked on teams and the teams that had what I thought was a high quality culture versus a low quality culture or less of a quality culture. I tried to figure out what were the attributes of these teams. Certainly, it was hard to measure care, of course, and certainly it was much more than bugs. But what was it? And it's one of those things where the idea spun in my head for a long time with me doing nothing. And this is the advantage of being a procrastinator, is that in the end, something popped up and came out on paper, and it's been pretty valuable since then. It were these attributes: testing breadth, tech debt, data. I found that very valuable. I'll talk about all of these in a minute. How the team takes on learning and improvement, which is, you could say, is an aspect of care. Code quality and tools, the dev approach, test ownership and quality ownership, and leadership support. These are the attributes I came up with that describe, I think, well, in my opinion and in my so far a couple years of experience with this, describe pretty well what leads to a quality culture. And then from there, I made a bit of a maturity model, but again, due to my hatred or dislike of maturity models, I called it a quality culture transition guide. And that link I'll share at the end of the presentation as well, but share it here if you want to follow along. It looks like a maturity model, but it's a quality culture transition guide. And the idea is I wanted to describe a current state that was awful, or current state that we shouldn't say awful, a current state that a lot of teams have been in, and then a desired state, and then some steps that would help you get there. And I'm not going to go through the whole thing. That would take far too long and be probably far too boring when you can look through this on your own. But I do want to walk through a little bit of the nature of each of these. Maybe just look at the lowest state and the highest state, and just as you look through it on your own, you can see how I filled in the transition to get from one end of the transition guide to the other. Before we go into it, and probably is a good place to rant a little bit more about maturity models. All models are wrong. Some are useful. I do see people with loud voices on the internet throwing out the baby with the bathwater and saying that a model, for example, I should start a holy war here with the testing pyramid. All models are wrong. Some are useful. What I'm about to show you here, the same story. Very quickly, what I dislike about maturity models is that when I worked with a little bit with CMMI many years ago, two things I noticed. One, there was I don't recall if it was a requirement, but a strong preference that you move in lockstep all the way from every attribute across the model from one level to another. I think you may make conscious and good business decisions to not improve all your quality model at once, or your quality culture, and it may make sense for you to move parts of it in different rates than the others. Also, I'm very much against the idea of hiring some consultant to come in and evaluate where you are in this model. Probably a couple of you have already opened up the spreadsheet that I linked to on the last slide, and this is not a scorecard. Don't give your team a red, yellow, or green. This is something you can use to start communication on your team. And I have teams pull it out in retros all the time. It's a way to figure out what are some things we're not doing today we may want to do differently that we think will help improve our culture of quality, and thus improve the quality of what we're delivering to our customers. So, caveats aside, let's dive into a little bit what this is so you know what I'm talking about and how I use this. First one is quality and test ownership. On one end, testers own quality. They're blamed for bugs. Some of you have lived in this world. Some of you may still live in this world. I hope not. At the other end, as some of you know from looking at my writings and other talks on the internet, I believe that developers can own the vast majority of testing, including especially owning all or almost all of automation. And teams may choose to get to a point of quality and test ownership where they do not need a dedicated quality specialist. That is a rat hole I won't go into deeply today, but I've seen it happen, and I've seen very successful teams have a very high quality culture without having testing specialists. Doesn't mean you don't need them. Some teams and contexts need them. You can decide that on your own, but that's one level you could reach there. Next one is the breadth of testing, and often I reference the Agile testing quadrants from Brian Merrick, and then which were then expanded by Lisa Crispin and Janet Gregory in their Agile testing book. I find the quadrants a really good way to understand different aspects of testing a team can do. And again, some people have dismissed these and rewritten them. All models are wrong and some are useful. If you don't like something, that doesn't mean they're useful. This is a little bit of a trigger point for me, as you can tell, so I'll move on. But on one end of testing breadth, you're entirely focused on a bunch of functional tests, test cases to verify a bunch of happy path stuff. You don't really do anything else. But on the other end, everyone on the team is involved in creating this multi-dimensional, multifaceted test strategy that covers almost everything you can think of. Not over testing, but covering the right amount of stress and perf and load and everything else in order to make sure your product is going to be acceptable and provide value to your customers. Very much overlapped with testing ownership, because I do expect at this highest level for the whole team to be involved, but definitely a reachable level. And again, to remind you, I have 2 levels here. I've given them some names stolen from some other maturity models. There are other levels in there with much more text, just trying to get to the gist of what these cover today. The next one's tech debt and maintenance. Probably the biggest example here is the bug backlog. I have found that teams that have a low quality culture also love to hold on to lots and lots of their old bugs. Incidentally, I have found that average bug age by itself is a pretty good indicator, or has a pretty good correlation with what I see as the quality culture of a team. So it's something I do look at on new teams I work with. As teams mature here and get really good at this, it's not just bugs, but it's other tech debt. Tech debt is dealt with regularly. But often teams at a high level of a quality culture, they don't have a bug backlog. When a bug comes in, they either decide to fix it right away or postpone it as needed, or not postpone, or resolve it as needed. They just don't tolerate debt. It's like the difference between the person who pays their minimum payment every month on their credit card versus the person who always makes the full payment because they just don't want to deal with debt and the interest that goes along with that. I could argue that interest with tech debt is even more expensive than your worst check cashing place, but again, that's a whole other talk. Another category is code quality and tools. In some teams, just compiling your code with a very low warning level is enough, and ignoring the warnings that do get produced is on one end of the scale. On the other end of the scale are teams that not only use the highest level of warnings, they fix their warnings, they add additional linters, and linters are static analysis tools, things that can find not just syntactical bugs in your code, but everything from spelling errors to geopolitical issues to offensive names that may show up in the customer code. I found that teams with a high level of a quality culture tend to run a lot of these tools in their CI systems, a lot of analysis on code. They like using the computer to help improve the quality of their code. The story I often tell here is the time I was frustrated because working on a web product at my old job at Microsoft, and about twice in 2 weeks, someone broke HTML code, like they missed a closing tag. And granted, it was in Angular, so it was a little obscure, but they were breaking HTML. And I said, I'm going to grab a HTML linter off the internet. I'll get the one with the most stars on GitHub. I integrated it into our pipeline. And again, coming from a test background, I'm very careful when I check in production code, and I'll call production code our pipeline code. Lots of code review. I tested it a lot. I wrote unit tests for my linter, made sure it worked. I checked it in, and the very next build broke, and I felt really bad because I carried guilt with me when I break the build, and I wanted to see what I screwed up and what obscure thing I messed up and putting this thing into our CI system. And I didn't. My work was actually good, but the very next check-in after my linter was someone who broke the HTML. So that's there cemented. Like, I got the value of the work in adding this linter within seconds, if not minutes, of me adding this. So pretty good quality culture on that team as far as code quality and tools go. So point made. Moving on to the next one. This is something that a lot of teams don't take advantage of, which is looking at customer data. I truly believe that only the customer can evaluate the quality of our products. So without data, unless you want to go interview, unless you only have 5 customers, you can talk to them, or whether you want to interview 5,000 customers or more if you have them, we have to use data to understand whether or not the customers are being successful using our products. There's no way to tell otherwise. So a question, the teams with a high quality culture, for everything they're doing, they're thinking of it in some way as an experiment. They're going to have a hypothesis on why this change is important, and they're going to use data to understand if the change is having the impact they wanted it to have. On the other level, on the other end, as I'm sure is true with at least a couple teams here today, the customer data, and we're not talking about PAI, we're talking about customer usage patterns, is ignored. So there is a correlation here. If you really care about your customer, you need to understand how they're using your product. The development approach is also important here, and this is, I'm sure a lot of you are having agile practices. We've all been on the other hand, all been on cowboy teams where everyone did what they want. Done is not only not defined, done is someone else's job to go do as we test quality into the product. Hopefully none of you are in a team like that. But on the other end, and again, this is a lot stolen from Agile. And in fact, a lot of my thoughts are, this is all centered around Agile and Lean Startup and things I've seen teams do when they've been consistently successful in delivering products that customers like. But in a mature team, feature development is really well organized. The teams have a good planning process in place. They're able to break things down into the right size pieces. Throughput is generally good. And as within data, they're doing a lot of experimenting in order to understand whether or not what they're doing is the right thing. And then learning and improvement. So I think, Peter Senge wrote in Fifth Discipline that the learning organization is the hidden or the untold competitive advantage. And on one end, you can have a team that just does their work, doesn't bother to learn. But if you have a team that embraces learning through, whether it's through analyzing incidents or whether it's through doing frequent retros on the team, those teams tend to do a lot of the other things on this list because they find lots of areas to improve. And they find that taking that time to reflect on what's going well and what's not going well is a benefit for their team. So again, it should be a head nodder there, but not enough teams take advantage of the retrospective. I have said before, and I'll say it again, is that other than your one-on-one with your manager, I think a team retrospective is the most important meeting your team can have. Some may disagree, but that's my stance. And again, I'm going to repeat what I said before because it's worth repeating. It's not a blueprint. It's not a scorecard. It's a conversation starter. It's great working backward. It's great for it to come out in the retro. But often the way I introduce this to a team is to just have them read the chart. And again, it's the full spreadsheet is linked. And I'll have it on the next slide. But have them read through it, self-evaluate a little bit. It can be on their own or within a team discussion. There's no right or wrong answer. If you find yourself debating on whether you're at level 2 or level 3, it's not the point. Have a discussion about kind of where you are and have some alignment on where you are. Remember, alignment is not consensus. And coming out of that meeting, just like with a good retro, once you've reviewed what's in this transition guide, is come up with 1 or 2 things, maybe 3 at the most, but I like 1 or 2 that you think you may want to improve. Like looking at your team, go, wow, we're really good here. We're not so good here. It may not be the lowest thing you want to improve, but you want to pick the low-hanging fruit. I'm a big fan of the matrix that shows effort and impact. I love to do the low effort, high impact work. So it's just adding a linter if the team's going to pay attention to it, or something else where you can go, I can just do this one little thing that's going to make a big difference here in what we do. In fact, low effort, high impact for me, if your team's not doing retrospectives, start doing retrospectives. Just remember to refer to it frequently. I've found, and lots of my teammates that have used it, and even some folks outside of where I work have used it, they find just a valuable reference to go back to and think, okay, how are we doing here? Are there things we're not doing? How can we improve the way our team works to deliver software that our customers love? So that's just a crash course on my guide to improving quality with a few tips on how to go get that done in a way that the team will adopt.
Is where the homepage
And there's the
of
link
the
again.
A/B testing
You can follow
podcast,
my
which you're
blog at
also welcome to
angryweasel.com.
listen
Of
to at any
course,
time. And you
moderntesting.org
can
is
send
where
questions my
the
way
homepage
either.
of the A/B testing podcast, which you're also welcome to listen to at any time. And you can send questions my way either through one of those places or in the panel discussion coming up, or if I time this right, maybe right now. We have a few minutes, so why don't
Thank you
I
so
just
much,
end
Alan.
this and I'll take some live questions.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, thank you so much, Alan. I'm just waiting for Slido to appear, and then I can. In the meantime, can you hear me? You okay?
Yeah, I got you fine.
Great stuff. I've got slight issues with making an appearance, so you can't necessarily see me. But anyway, I was really interested and very pleasantly surprised to hear reference to Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. I read that I think a year or two after it came out in the 70s. I can't
Oh,
remember
wow.
exactly. It's good to see it again referenced. So what did you learn from that then? What did you get from that?
Well, my biggest takeaway and my summary for the book for people who may not want to read the whole thing is, it's a treatise on the philosophy of quality, and it's that statement that care and quality are two sides of the same coin. You don't beat quality into a motorcycle. You take care of it, and care goes into manufacturing, care goes into maintenance, and that's where quality comes from.
Yeah, yeah, that's a fact. There's a comment, not a question, but agree. Continuous representation versus stage representation of maturity improvement provides best business value. Thanks for sharing. That's from Mike Jared, one of our
Thumbs up.
speakers. What are your views? Well, a question. What were the two maturity models you referred to in your slides? I think.
Well, one was a model just taken right out of the pages of Continuous Delivery, the Jez Humble book from maybe now 12 years ago. And the other was just a picture from my copy of Accelerate.
Right.
They're from those two books I showed on the previous slide.
Okay, thank you. Next one. What are the thinking process challenges in terms of the AI-human maintenance relationship for testers who will do this kind of human-reasoning work on the AI? Does that make sense?
It does. I'm not sure what it has to do with the talk I gave.
But you can always adjust the question to suit you what you want to say.
Alan, you've been doing this for a while. This question's been burning a hole in my head. So the answer there is, of course, AI does need human training, and AI doesn't solve everything. I run across a lot of people who think that, oh man, we have all this data. I just need a data scientist to look at it and tell me magic, and it doesn't really work that way.
Yeah.
We seem to call everything AI today, whether it's just a slightly learning algorithm or something that's interactive. So I think the takeaway there is, at least for the short term, humans are and will continue to remain heavily involved in the tuning of anything we refer to as machine learning or AI.
I think so too. Yeah. Okay. Next one. I'm afraid anonymous again. This is a comment. Microsoft went from test/dev.org to unified engineering. What do you think about this? Did it make better software?
In some cases, yes. In some cases, absolutely not. So the metaphor that Brent, my podcast partner, and I use quite a bit is they called it combined engineering for a while, which is kind of like oil and vinegar dressing. They separate naturally, and we want unified engineering to be more like ranch dressing, where it just kind of always stays together. What that means in practicality is, like, Brent and I were there watching this change happen at Microsoft, and some teams made the transition very well. They actually thought about how testing and quality would be affected and moved to teams that didn't have testing specialists. Some teams did it blindly, and team morale and quality both suffered. So a lot of teams are making this transition to having fewer, at least, or in some cases, no dedicated testers. But if you don't do it with a plan and you don't understand what you're doing, you're probably going to screw it up.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Next one, regarding the definition of done, can you share thoughts on the definition of done for testing?
Yeah, I don't believe in a definition of done for testing. It's part of the definition of done for the thing that's being released.
Exactly. I think so too. That makes sense to me.
So, that's the short answer. So yeah, in our teams that don't have dedicated testers, we do work with, and I should say we have. I run a central dev. My bio is a little out of date, but I run basically an infrastructure org. But it also, and plus a few other hodgepodge items. But one is quality consultants. I have a small team of 4 really good, really senior QA folks who work across hundreds and hundreds of engineers, helping them improve their testing. And one of the big things is we have our developers create a test plan as part of their planning and definition of done.
Yep. I think there's the old mantra that testing never ends, it stops. I think Doc might have said that to me 25, 30 years ago. At any rate, let's pause it there, because what I want to do is kick off the panel session in a couple of minutes, and just to give a chance to Alan Richardson to join in. So we're going to have fun saying which Alan, so I'll use your full name, if that's okay, to refer to you in the next few minutes.
Yesterday we used Alan 1 and Alan 2, but however you want to do it.
Well, which one is 1 and which one is 2? Are you going to compare ages? How are we going to do this?
Number 1.
Okay.
Yeah, Alan, to Alan with the beard.
All right.